Thank you, Imran. I thought alphabetically, both in terms of China and India, or between Hanhua and Swaran Singh, it should be Professor Hanhua to speak first, but I follow your instructions and I will try to make opening remarks for about 15 minutes, as you mentioned. I'm delighted to see that Ambassador Nadeem Riaz also is with us, is president of IRS. Of course, I'm delighted to be on panel with Ambassador Kiani, Dr. Syed Ali, and of course, my very old friend, Professor Hanhua. We first met in 1999 in Honolulu in Hawaii. And it's a long-term knowing each other over a period of time. And I've always appreciated her indulgence with South Asian studies and India studies, despite her major responsibilities also being arms control and disarmament. So I'm delighted to be on this panel. Thank you to the IRS team for organizing this. Let me quickly use my 15 minutes to underline first thing. There's so much coming out, particularly in last 2 years, about the tensions between China and India. There is no doubt it's a difficult time or chapter for China-India relations. But simultaneously, so much is being overlooked, which is positive. And I want to quickly enumerate a few things. The most recent statistics that have come out of from Beijing, because their financial year runs from January to December, is that for 2021, China-India trade has come back and become, the largest trade of India around the world. Briefly, for 2020, United States had become the largest. And the rise of trade has been about 44% over last year, reaching $125 billion. This is along with the tensions that are continuing, and so also Chinese investments. About different estimates show between 26 to $50 billion over a period of time, particularly infrastructure, e-commerce, etc., etc. So there is simultaneously something nice which have also been happening positive in bilateral relationship. Again, when it comes to pandemic, I think the whole world, as Ambassador Kiani was just mentioning before we started, is suffering. It's a human tragedy in that sense. Has also highlighted some of the positive linkages between China and India. For example, India's medicines that were supposed to be cured, or at least the treatment, if not cured, before the vaccines arrived. And I'm talking of hydroxychloroquine or paracetamol, also came in light, but it also brought to knowledge that, the APIs, the ingredients that go into making of that medicine, between 70 to 90% come from China. It also brought to light how about 24,000 Indian students are studying in China, of which 21,000 are learning medicine in China. So something which is simultaneously moving forward as positive linkages between two countries is perhaps sometimes not really highlighted, which I think needs to also be understood. Second, when it comes to how has China-India equations impacted South Asia, the most visible, again, narratives talk about the Belt and Road Initiative of China leading to sudden increase of China's investments in South Asia. Pakistan, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor being on the lead in that sense. But I also want to underline how this whole beautiful vision of BRI has come out of China's compulsions. Excess of foreign exchange, excess of factories churning out material, excess of youth coming out of universities seeking employment. So to me, it's not as much out of ambitions, as much out of compulsions that BRI has gone out and invested in what we very often consider to be conflict zones, to be not stable regions, not areas where per dollar returns can be attractive to Chinese. So in that sense, one has to understand that China's engagement with South Asia in terms of investments is not driven to deal with India, but it's a phenomenon worldwide. China is investing in all parts of the world, including in South Asia. So therefore, I wouldn't like to see it as exclusively aimed at India. or undermining India's influence in South Asia. That is a byproduct that India feels concerned about China's increasing footprint and influence in South Asia. Third thing I need to underline also is how most of the South Asian countries have engaged China primarily in terms of hedging against India. Given the fact that most of South Asian countries other than India are very small compared to India. In fact, until Afghanistan joined SAARC, none of the other SAARC members had any common borders between each other but with India. So something that in IR theory we call small state syndrome is understandable, that they have concerns about India being inordinately large, big economy, influential player, and therefore the primary driver for South Asia's engagement with China has been a strategy of hedging and seeking some kind of balancing between, not being vulnerable to India in that sense. And now it comes to the pandemic and immediate period, because I have just 15 minutes to talk about. Again, in pandemic, I think Nepal was the only exception where the ratcheting up of rhetoric from, particularly from one leader, KP Sharma Oli, was coinciding with the tensions on border between China and India. And there were insinuations, therefore, that perhaps this was done in consideration of either pleasing Beijing or in terms of taking advantage of tensions between China and India during that time. But that period also was a limited span of time, and it is over now. There's a change of leadership in Nepal, and the rhetoric has more or less disappeared. To some extent, Maldives could be another example where you saw that in 2018, for example, President Yamin had unusually closer cooperation with China. A lot of investments were coming at that time. Sudden change in Maldives was a matter of concern for India. But India decided to only use political and diplomatic engagement to seek balance. And even when the constitutional crisis happened in 2018 under Yamin government, and finally the election happened, Mohammad Soleh came to power, and India, of course, took advantage and extended about $500 million of aid to the new government there. So there was no possibility of, again, some kind of a peacekeeping operation. You would remember earlier examples of India's peacekeeping operations in Maldives. It did not happen, and then situation was handled very differently. Sri Lanka is another example. In 2008, Rajapaksa was very close to Beijing, but when he came back to power again in 2019, it's a relatively more subtle, nuanced, calibrated, balanced relationship between how Sri Lanka has sought to engage both India and China in this context. So what I'm underlining is that there is a constant learning happening in South Asian countries as to how to engage China and how to deal with that enormous incentive of Belt and Road Initiative projects, which many of these countries have begun to realize are not really as fascinating as they appeared to begin with. Now, the last example in terms of that hedging strategy I would like to give from Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is apparently, at least in India, believed to be the most allied ally of China. And of course, CPEC is a big example of Belt and Road Initiative taking place. But interesting it is that despite, sort of certain freeze in India-Pakistan dialogue, there was no negative sign or negative indication from Pakistan during these India-China tensions. Pakistan did not try to take an advantage of that situation. Indeed, in middle of that situation, in February last year, 25th February last year, India and Pakistan recommitted themselves to the ceasefire on line of actual control, which is an excellent reflection of a very pragmatic, balanced approach to how to behave in case of tensions on border between China and India. And indeed, another step, beautiful, Pakistan is today cooperating with India to ensure India's humanitarian aid can go all the way to Afghanistan, and trying to sort of make sure that it is not really pushing Taliban into taking too many anti-India positions or some things like that. So fundamentally, a far more pragmatic approach is evolving among South Asian countries as to how to ensure their engagement remains balanced between their engagement with China and their engagement with India, and they do not seek to undertake some kind of unusual advantages when it comes to tensions on border between China and India. Now, I'm not so sure when it comes to Beijing. I'm more sure about the South Asian neighbors. And despite so much positive happening in Beijing and New Delhi or India-China relations that I underlined to begin with, apparently the skepticism or trust deficit between Beijing and New Delhi has showcased. For example, when last year India saw a spike during the second wave of a pandemic, India had to naturally stop exporting its vaccines, which it was exporting around the world, including to neighbors, for example, to Bangladesh, even to Bhutan. Bhutan is the closest country for India in South Asia. And therefore, they naturally approached the other possible sources and vaccines, for example, to Bhutan came from United States, from European Union, and also China. Now, in that context, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi initiated a China South Asia initiative, which was very interesting because in that initiative, it was called China and South Asia Initiative, just like China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, but it involves regions which are in dispute between India and Pakistan. So India's problem is why it is called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Likewise here, Wang Yi's dialogue was called China-South Asia Dialogue. And indeed, it involved most of the countries of South Asia, other than Maldives, Bhutan, and India. So out of 8, 5 countries did engage China in that dialogue. And that dialogue resulted in creation of China-South Asia countries Emergency Supplies Reserve, which is for medicines, but also Poverty Alleviation and Cooperative Development Center in Chongqing in China. Now, in that, I saw that India was not really kind of seriously engaged. And when you want to call it China-South Asia Initiative, perhaps engagement of India was kind of anticipated to be part and parcel of that engagement. And from there, I want to say that because China and India are world's largest populations, and of course, strongest economies, at least in purchasing power parity, China is the largest economy, India is third largest economy on the planet. In that sense, their bilateral trust deficit then has reflections beyond their bilateral relationship. It begins to make both sides overreact, not just in South Asia, but in other contexts. For example, it would have implications for Indian Ocean region. Of course, Indian Ocean region has also seen Chinese and Indian navies cooperating, patrolling in Gulf of Aden, even rescuing a particular ship under stress from pirates. But it does create certain implications, geopolitical implications for Indian Ocean, even for Indo-Pacific. I would say it would create certain implications as to how India sees itself engaging with Eurasia, how India sees itself engaging with, for example, Far East or Indo-Pacific. In that sense, what I'm underlining is that this trust deficit has implications not just in South Asia, but beyond South Asia. Now, for instance, my friends in China, for example, very often insinuate motives into how India and Japan are working together. Whether they are working together in building infrastructure in India, or they are building Asia-Africa growth corridor, or they are kind of collaborating in quadrilateral security dialogue, it does generate perhaps little unexpected responses and analysis from China. And I would agree that maybe Chinese see that India also has similar biases and analysis, which my friend Professor Han Hua might like to underline. And let me close by saying two things that we need to really, or 2 or 3 things that we need to really focus, because IRS is a policy think tank and it always looks at where should we move forward, not just look at problem, but look at solutions. I think first thing is to make sure somehow a very beautiful arrangement of informal summit meetings that had started between China and India can be brought back into action. I'm not sure how and when and who will help us doing that, I understand lately President Vladimir Putin has been taking certain interest in at least starting Russia, India, China trilateral summit meetings, which will bring Indian Prime Minister and Chinese President face to face. But some kind of that very innovative framework of informal summits had led to some beautiful decisions. Immediately relevant for South Asia in that sense is something that in April of 2018, in Wuhan, President Xi Jinping had proposed and Indian Prime Minister had accepted something called 2+1 model, which meant that China and India, as equal partners, will go and work with third countries. And the first initiative they had jointly taken in same year in August was training Afghan diplomats in Indian Foreign Services Institution here in Delhi. And likewise, there was then people writing articles and op-eds that next country could be maybe Sri Lanka, where India, China could work together and initiate some joint projects in that. So that informal kind of setting between two very, very ambitious, very powerful leaders had led to certain kind of out-of-box solutions. Likewise, I think we need to think of some breakthrough in India-Pakistan relationship, because Pakistan is the most important country other than India in South Asia. And very often India-Pakistan equations have impact on the larger region itself and how both Pakistan and India engage the other countries in the region. My hope is that this inordinate challenge of Taliban 2.0 and the humanitarian crisis which are evolving in Afghanistan right now, in which case Pakistan is the most influential and critical player. Any solutions for Pakistan would involve, any solutions in Afghanistan would involve Pakistan for sure. And this new beginning of Pakistan and India coordinating in humanitarian aid of India going to Afghanistan could be a possibility, and I could be as ambitious to say that this breakthrough these are things which is where I think some bold initiatives would be required to make sure that both India and China become the positive locomotives for development of entire South Asia, rather than being seen as an either-or option for South Asian neighbors. They should not look at China and India as a choice that they have to choose one of the two. They can choose both India and China, and India and China can both work together in development of South Asia, because they bring very different things to the table. China can bring turnkey projects of very, very heavy duty, large size. India can be, much better in training people, in educating people, in sort of building kind of projects which are also equally interesting and commercially viable projects compared to China, for example, because they are mega projects. So both can bring their own advantages to bring development to South Asia, and that kind of possibility is what we should look forward to. To me, that's difficult, but it's not impossible. And I think certain openings and cracks like India, Pakistan working together in providing humanitarian aid to Afghanistan could be seen as an opening. So foot in the door is something that I'm indicating, and we could move forward from there. I'm looking forward to my other co-panelists also making their comments, and also if there are any questions at end of our formal presentations. With that, I hand it back to Dr. Imran Sardar.